So earlier in this year, I started a series of videos asking the question, what is the Bible all about? And in this series of videos, we've been looking at big picture ways to understand and articulate the storyline of the Bible. Because of the global pandemic that we've been working through over the last few months, I decided to put that series on hold, but in this video, I'm going to pick it back up and we're going to look at the Bible as it pertains to the mission of God. Stick around. I think you'll enjoy it. Now, when the Bible opens up, the story begins with God doing some good, wonderful work in creating the world that we live in now. But it only takes 3 chapters into the story before things start to go sideways for humanity. Sin and destruction and death enter the world, and God watches His good world spiral into chaos and destruction. And then a few chapters later, in Genesis chapter 11 and 12, God calls this man by the name of Abraham, and He says to Abraham, I'm going to launch a worldwide redemption project. In Abraham, I'm starting with you. And so the mission of God is not something that comes later in the story of the Bible, but the mission of God is in the very first pages of the Bible. And God's mission to the world is motivated by His love for the world. It's His good, wonderful creation that has lost its way, and He wants to redeem it back. And then once you get into the New Testament, it's the person of Jesus Christ who primarily becomes God's agent of redemption. And so 2 Corinthians 5 tells us that we are called to live as ambassadors or representatives of Christ in this world. This is what Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 5. He said, all of this is from God, who reconciled us to Himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation, that God was reconciling the world to Himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them. And He has committed to us the message of reconciliation. Therefore, we are Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making His appeal through us. And so that means the question for us is, how do we live as ambassadors and representatives of Christ in this world? And so what I want to do is show you a missional tool that describes 2 different paradigms or 2 different mindsets on how we serve as ministers of reconciliation. One is called a bounded set, the other is called a centered set. Now in this first diagram, the first part of this diagram, the bounded set diagram, the cross represents Jesus, and all of these other dots represent people. Some are closer to Christ, and some are further to Christ. But when we're serving as ministers of reconciliation, oftentimes the question we're asking ourselves is who's in the family of God and who's not. So because we pride certainty and love certainty, oftentimes what we do is we draw a boundary around Jesus, around the cross, around the church, and we say those who are on the right side of this boundary are in, those who are on the outside of this boundary aren't in. And so oftentimes our missional engagement at that point means we bring people, the way we exercise our missional engagement is we bring people to this boundary marker and we say, in order to cross in, there's certain things you have to do. Maybe it's pray a prayer, maybe it's go to church on a regular basis, maybe it's adopt a new set of principles and habits and spiritual practices. And once you do those things and you have the right language and you have the right way of living, then you're in. That's called a bounded set mentality. But what we end up doing when we live in this paradigm is we spend so much of our spiritual energy trying to ask and answer the question, who's in and who's out? All the while not realizing that's not necessarily a question for us to fully decide, because we don't have the power to change someone's heart. The person who has that power is Jesus Himself and His Spirit. And so the other paradigm is what is known as a centered set mentality. Now, in this paradigm, there's still the cross, with Jesus being the center of this paradigm, in the center of this diagram, and there's still people who are at different places in the relationship with God, different distances to and from Jesus. But what's most important in the centered set mindset is not where are they in relation to the boundary marker, but where are they in relation to Jesus, specifically, where are they in their orientation to Jesus? Meaning, are they moving towards Jesus, or are they moving further away from Jesus? And the responsibility that we have as ministers of reconciliation is to bring people to Jesus. One of my favorite passages in the book of John is John 1. Some of the disciples have met Jesus for the first time, and I think it was Peter and Andrew, two brothers. Andrew meets Jesus first. And then it says in John 1 that he goes and he finds his brother Peter and he brings him to Jesus. We have the power and the ability to bring people to Jesus. We don't have the power or the ability to change somebody's heart. So instead of spending our energy trying to convince people to cross a boundary marker, perhaps we should simply spend our energy bringing people to Jesus and allowing Jesus to do the work in their life. And so what we can celebrate in that regard is anybody, no matter how far they are away from God, even if they're all the way up here, if their orientation is towards Jesus, we can celebrate that movement towards Jesus rather than have to play judge on who's in and who's out. And so that means there's all sorts of people in your life. And the question we want to ask is, where are they in relationship to Jesus? And then how can I help bring them one step closer to Jesus, all the while trusting that God is at work in their life, that He ultimately is calling people to Himself, and you get to walk with them along the way. I hope this short video was an encouragement to you. I hope it brings a little bit of clarity on what the Bible is all about and how God's mission is central to the story of Scriptures and what your role on that mission is. Grace and peace to you. We look forward to seeing you again real soon. Hey there, thanks for watching this video all the way to the end. If you found it helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe, share it with friends, share it with people who also might be encouraged by it, and we'll be back in a few weeks with another video for you to hopefully encourage you in your relationship with the Lord. Have a great rest of the week.